flagellation, typically an unwilling act of religious punishment. Special implements are used on the unclothed back of those who have sinned. Through the suffering of the flesh, sins can be purged. How much blood would you shed to regain purity?
Hello DevOps people, how you doing? I'm Grant. Thank goodness it's Friday, and I've decided to make it Friday on Rails. So I thought about giving my different stream days a theme, and so there is probably going to be a retro Saturday tomorrow where I'm doing something with older tech, and today it's going to be Friday on Rails. So what we're doing today is somewhat related to Ruby on Rails. I'll probably be working on one of my Rails apps, but before I do that, I'd like to answer a few questions that Diego, DigaOV2, here in chat, had sent me on our Discord server. So if you'd like, you can join my Discord server. Here's the address. Not only can you reach me there if you have any questions, you can also post questions there that I'll then pick up and discuss on the on stream. So that's exactly what I'm going to do today. And if there's anything else you'd like to share, pop into chat. If you'd like me to explain something, if there is anything you don't understand and seems very strange, which is usually the case with my stuff, then ask. And if you have any feedback that you'd like to share, please do so as well. I'm very fond of making this thing interactive, so don't hold back. All right then. So what did we do last time? Let me check my I'm sorry. Let me check my stream notes from last time. Yeah, I see. Yeah. On Wednesday we did some Rails coding as well, and what looked like a pretty simple task, which is replace a certain term, namely owner, with a more specific term, namely admin, turned out to be quite a bit of work, because not only was it used in the user interface, it also was used in method names. So there was a lot of refactoring and replacing stuff, and turns out I didn't even catch all the occurrences of owner. A day or two after this change, I noticed that the people who previously were named owners and now were named admins didn't get a label anymore when in the list of users. Normally owners had a small label next to them, and I expected there to be a label admin, and there wasn't any. And it turned out that I did not use code to decide if to display this label or not. Instead, I did a comparison, a string comparison of the access level field with owner, and that still worked, of course. It was syntactically correct, because you can, of course, compare a column in the database with a string. However, of course, there wasn't any string owner anymore, because that string is actually generated by Rails itself. The database column in question is an integer column, but since I've made it an enum column in the Rails model, Rails also replaces the integer values with strings from the enum definition. So that was the wrong way, though. Instead, I should have used the owner A, so the owner question mark method before, and that would have clearly broken after changing the enum definition, and had forced me to use the admin A method that then would be auto-generated. And since I didn't do that and instead used a string comparison, it didn't break and didn't get discovered until I used the application myself and was wondering where the labels were. So what I've learned from that is not only should you always think about your terminology in advance, because changing it later will be a lot of work, but also you should use methods, if there are any, instead of building your own comparisons and things like that. Because especially with auto-generated methods, they disappear if you change the definition, and then your tests break and you know what to fix. A string comparison will always work in this context. Alrighty, so that was last stream. Now let's go to today. So Diego had a question: what is the difference between decorators, presenters, and view objects? Which one do I have to use in Rails and when? And that's an awesome question, because it's about object-oriented design, and having a good design will determine how well your application can be maintained, how well you can read your code, how well you can change your code, how easy you can change your code. And so I'll be more than happy to answer this question. And in order to do that, let's do a little example application. Here I have my editor, and I'd like to discuss this with an application that manages burgers. So let's assume we have a class burger, and this class, let's start this as a burger.rb. So VI does know that that it's Ruby. Let's see. Okay. Here we go. Okay. So let's assume we have a class burger. I'm sorry. And burger has a method that determines the price. Let's call it price. So let's say the classic burger costs 5 of something. And it has a method ingredients that returns a list of ingredients. So we'll simply return this as an array. So we have the bun, we have the patty, and we have some lettuce. Very basic burger, but that's more than sufficient. So let's make a burger. And let's output the price. Okay. The price will be burger.price, and the ingredients, let's do a burger ingredients. So let's run this. Okay. So far so good. You still with me? Now, let's assume we have different sizes of burgers. So we have a large burger, and the large burger has the same ingredients, just a bit more of them, and therefore a bit of a higher price. So in very basic object-oriented manner, we could simply derive a subclass, large burger, which inherits from burger. And here we have the same ingredients but a different price, so we overwrite this price and say, okay, the large burger is 7. And if we have a large burger, we should see the same ingredients but a different price. Straightforward. It gets more complicated though. How about we have different variants of that burger? Say we have a cheeseburger. So the cheeseburger has different ingredients and a different price. That would look like this. Cheeseburger also inherits from burger. Then we have a price, say that's 6. And we have different ingredients. Ingredients will be similar to the burger, however there's cheese on top. So we can use the super method to call the base class method ingredients, which gives us the original array, bun, patty and lettuce. And then we merge that with another array that also has cheese. So now that we have a cheeseburger, let's see if this works. Yes, it does. We have a price of 6 and we have a bun, patty, lettuce and cheese. Any questions so far? Let's make it even more complicated. This month we offer bacon as an option. And we'd also like to offer a large cheeseburger with and without bacon. Do you so? Welcome. Good morning to you. It's afternoon here in Ireland. I assume you're a bit more to the west. Good morning. I hope you're having a great day so far. Okay, so as our domain burgers gets more complex, our class tree gets more complex. Because, okay, so how about we want a large cheeseburger? Ruby doesn't offer multiple inheritance, so I can't inherit from burger and from cheeseburger. I can't inherit from large burger and cheeseburger. We could make a few changes. I could probably define the price with the original method. I could say, okay, large meat is 2 extra. So that's super plus 2 in the case of a large burger. And cheese costs 1 extra. So I could say super plus 1. That should still yield the same results. But I won't be able to say, okay, now I'd like to combine large burger and cheeseburger to a large cheeseburger, because that would require multiple inheritance, which Ruby doesn't offer. And multiple inheritance in general is a bit frowned upon because it makes things very complex and very hard to understand, because let's just take a look at the price method. If I was able to do multiple inheritance for a large cheeseburger, which price method would be called if I call large cheeseburger price. So that's getting complex very quickly. And if I put bacon into the mix as well, you can see that we'll quickly get a lot of classes that have lots of overlap. And that's not what we want to do and want to have, because in terms of clean code as a principle, your code should be easy to read. And there's another downside of having a lot of classes, especially some classes inheriting from others. And that is, classes are static. You can't change classes easily during the run of your application. So that's where decorators come in. A decorator is a so-called pattern that allows you to add functionality to an existing class. And it's not relying on class definitions, so you don't have to assign a class in your code. You can do composition, which is the more general term, during the run of your program. So another thing that I should probably demonstrate is how these classes get used in the application. Here I simply assign a cheeseburger, but imagine we asked the user what kind of burger they have or want, and then we need to respond with the price and the ingredients. That would require something like, and I'll just quickly use some kind of pseudocode. Instead of burger equals cheeseburger, we would have something like if type or if choice equals burger, then we would have to say burger equals burger new. Else if choice equals large burger, burger equals large burger new, and so on and so on. And you can see that that is really not well maintainable. So every time we change our class hierarchy, we'll also have to change this if statement or case statement, whatever we use here. That's actually an anti-pattern. As soon as you realize, okay, as soon as I change my class hierarchy here, I have to change other code as well and add more conditions here. That's something that should be avoided if possible. So how else can we do this? And how can we make it more maintainable? That's where decorators come in. A decorator object was originally called a wrapper object, and that pretty much sums it up, because a decorator object wraps an existing class and simply overrides what needs to be overridden using the original class's remaining functionality. And let's not delete everything, just this part. Class large burger can easily be made a decorator by not deriving it from burger anymore. Instead, we'll have an instance variable or an attribute burger. And we'll simply pass in a burger object that we then assign to our instance variable. And instead of using super in here, which we can't anymore, there is no inheritance anymore, we'll simply say at burger price plus 2. We'll do the same for our cheeseburger. So that's at burger plus 1. The ingredients is at burger ingredients Thanks for the correction. Oh, hey, Julian, welcome. I missed a colon here. And we'll also need the burger. So, now, what we can do is we can create a burger object. And simply use our base class, burger new. That will give us the basic burger. However, we can also create a large burger simply by saying large burger new, and we'll pass in the basic burger. Undefined method ingredients for large burger. Large burger doesn't have the ingredients method. And here, since a large burger doesn't change the ingredients, we can simply call burger ingredients. So you can see one of the costs of using a decorator is you don't have that automatic what's called message passing anymore that you have in when you have inheritance. That's a bit of a downside, but we can mitigate that, and I'll get into that later. But so now we should be able to run this, and the large burger has price 7 with the usual ingredients, and we can also create a cheeseburger. Yep. Here's the same, wait, at burger price plus 1. Cheeseburger costs 6, and we have cheese on top of bun, patty, and lettuce. So that works as well. What we can do now is create a large cheeseburger simply by saying I want a large burger based on... Wait, why didn't that work? Strange. Okay, now it works. We create a large burger based on a cheeseburger based on a normal burger. Let's see how this works. Now we have a price of 8, and there is bun, patty, lettuce, and cheese. So now we are able to compose whatever we need without being forced to create lots and lots of variants in our classes. And Ruby allows us to simplify things a bit, because there is a base class, simple decorator, that automatically passes through methods that aren't defined in our decorator. So if we have the case of ingredients here, I can delete this, because simple decorator will... Oh, I've made a mistake. That should be simple decorator. So things should still work. Simple decorator doesn't exist. Delegator, sorry. Simple delegator. Thanks, Ruby, for telling me. Yeah, simple delegator simply takes care of the delegation of methods that we don't. That still doesn't work, yeah. How would simple delegator know that we want to delegate to burger? Let's look this up. Oops. Ruby simple delegator. Yeah, thing is, we simply pass in the object without having to initialize that. And I've accidentally moved this over. So... And... And I can still use super. Here we go. So that's basically that's what's called composition as opposed to inheritance. Large burger and cheeseburger don't inherit from burger anymore, but they are related to burger and can be composed to create variants. And you can see how easy it would be to add bacon to the mix as well. So we can build large burgers with bacon or small cheeseburgers with bacon or whatever we need. And we simply would have to create a new decorator object or class that can deal with the bacon issue. Maybe we add another money unit to the price, and of course we'll add the ingredients to we add bacon to the ingredients. And generally composition should be used over inheritance. Inheritance is very rigid and requires you to make your code very rigid. And so if there is not a very specific reason to use inheritance, I would recommend composition instead, because it makes things more maintainable in the long run. That's that. Any questions on that before I go on to the other terms? What did we have there? Presenters and view objects. Okay. So presenters and view objects are mostly the same, I would say. And they are a special case of composition. You would use you can use decorators as presenters or view objects as well. Presenters are mostly used when you have to have additional logic to present an object in a certain context on the screen, on a website, and you don't want to overload the specific base object with all this presentation logic. So, for example, let's assume I want to output my stuff. We could add a new method here that we call details. Can't think of anything else at the moment. And let's simply take the stuff down there and put it up there. So here we can call burger details. All right. Ooh, now we're running into an issue here. And that is virtual methods. Because details here uses the price and ingredients methods of the object itself, not the overridden methods here. But let's not get into that here because it doesn't really matter. Let's ignore our variants for a change, and we'll simply say we have a new burger and we want to output the details. Here we go. So, but now I want to output the ingredients as HTML. So of course we could now go up here and say def details HTML. But I could easily construe a situation where this will again turn into very complex code. Say we have HTML with CSS and HTML without, or something else. So we would get a proliferation of methods in here, and we would pollute the burger class with stuff that really isn't its main concern here. The burger class should maintain details of the burger itself and should not be concerned with output stuff on a console or on a website or something like that. And so especially if we need different flavors of HTML, maintaining them in the original burger class would make our code very hard to maintain again, because yeah, it's just overloaded with stuff here. Instead, we can use a decorator object. We'll decorate our burger class with a burger presenter. We'll again use a simple delegator to keep things simple. And we'll use a render method. And that could then output our HTML. So we would say something like this. Price, and here we call super price. And instead of calling burger details, we can call burger presenter new burger render. Oops. No superclass method render for burger. Of course. Wait, where's the error here? No superclass method render for burger. Of course, super would be the render method. How do I get the simple delegator space object? How would that happen? Doesn't really help. Simple example takes advantage of the fact that simple delegation object can be changed at any time. Well, I don't really want to change it. There's get object. Returns a current object method. Oh, the current object method calls are being delegated to. So I guess get object is the one I'm looking for. Let's try this. Get object price. Oh, no output. Of course. Because we need to put this. Here we go. So of course we would extend this to list the ingredients as well. And that way we have something that is very important for clean code, and that is separation of concerns. Our burger class up here takes care of managing whatever a burger does, which is not outputting ingredients in HTML. And we have the burger presenter, we could call it burger HTML presenter to be more precise. And this presenter only takes care of rendering HTML for a certain burger object. And that's what's called a presenter object, simply because it's especially concerned with presenting data. And a view object is just a presenter in the context of Ruby on Rails. Especially in Rails views, you have the issue that a view template has lots of HTML with CSS, and then you intersperse some Ruby code to fill the template with actual data. And if you're not careful, you quickly catapult yourself back into the olden days of PHP, where a PHP script would be HTML plus business logic all mixed and jumbled together. And that's exactly what you don't want. You want your templates to have your presentation data, which is HTML with CSS, and then you want simple and short code snippets in there that insert the data that you'd like to have rendered. And unfortunately, life is not that easy, because oftentimes you have conditions in there. So a certain part of the page should only be rendered if a certain condition is met. Or you have variants. For example, I was talking about my admin thing change at the beginning of the stream. So in certain cases I want to have a label admin next to a name, and in certain cases, if they are not an admin, I don't want the label to appear. Or maybe I want something be rendered in red under certain conditions and in blue under other conditions. And that way my view gets fuller and fuller with logic. And that's exactly what we don't want to have. We want our logic in files that end with RB. And we want our templates and all the HTML ending up in files that end with ERB or with HAML or something like that. Otherwise, it's again hard to maintain. And in order to make things easier, you can use these presenter objects or view objects, where a view would have something like h1 and then class and something like some Ruby, if something, then blue, else green. And then you have your text. That's just ugly. And the designer can't tell what is going to happen here without breaking their head. And the developer can't easily maintain this code because it's munged into this HTML. And so it's much easier, instead of passing in raw data and then having a lot of conditionals and stuff like this in here, using a presenter object on the data, passing in this presenter object, which we can now call a view object, and then we simply say view, view object title color. And now it's pretty clear, okay, all that happens in this code, which is just 2 words basically, is that somehow the title color gets selected. And since we are inserting this into a HTML class attribute, there obviously needs to be a CSS class related to what title color returns. And so we can go into our code to find out what the method title color does. Or we can go into our CSS and check what different classes we can choose from. However, we don't have to parse all this complex template code in order to make sense of things. And that's exactly what I've done in my dashboard application. And I'll show you that. Let's first quit this. Close this. And I guess we can leave this session altogether. And go to our dashboard API project. So this dashboard project is the user interface for our hosting platform. So it deals with objects like websites, or server clusters, or customers, or users, or companies, things like that. And it's pretty clear that our website object is the central object. And so the website show view was very convoluted. It was very long and it was full of code. And in one of my recent streams, I refactored everything. And now the view itself, oops, let's simply open it here. The view itself is very short. One reason is because I've broken it down into partials, which always helps. If you have a very long view file, breaking it up into separate files. And here we have the main part, we have the part about Git, the part about SSH, and here support domains, the database of a website, and the users. And as you can see, what I'm doing here, at the beginning of the view, I take the data, the raw data that gets passed in, which is a website object, and create a presenter object from it. And I also pass in the view itself that gives the presenter object access to all the helper methods that Rails views offer. Methods like link to and stuff like that. And instead of using @website everywhere, I'm simply using the presenter object everywhere. And that's what I'm passing into these partials. I also pass in website because in a few places I found it more straightforward to use the website object directly. And maybe I should take another look and use something like Simple Delegator to get rid of that and only work with the presenter object. That I think would probably make things even more readable. So let's take a look, for example, at the users partial, which is also pretty short and it's easy to read. It could be easier to read, to be honest, because I'm mostly using website still. Only down here, where I like to show buttons, I use the presenter object and call delete user role link. And it's up to the presenter object to render and style this link or button in this case. So before, I guess there were 4 or 5 lines of conditionals and stuff and CSS, and that's just not necessary to see here. Here I just see, okay, in terms of buttons, there is simply the delete button, and that's it. And if I want to know how this button is going to look like, I can go into the definition of the presenter object and take a look at it. So let's do exactly that. Where is my presenter object? Here is the website presenter object. And then we have the was it this one? Delete user role link. You can see there's a lot of logic, 2 conditions, if this and that, and then we have to create a link using an icon method and the certain route, and we need to use the method delete because it's a delete link and stuff like that. And we don't have to have these details in the view to see what the view does, to maintain the view. If we want to get into these details, it's much easier to go into this method and take care of things, instead of wading through hundreds of lines of template code and see where things happen and why and how they happen. So yeah, that's presenter objects, and in particular view objects. So just to summarize, view objects are basically presenter objects used in Rails views, and they, in a more general sense, they are all decorators. They use the decorator or wrapper pattern to achieve what they do. Let's see if I can find another part of the view that is easier to see. Here, for example, in the domains section, I take advantage of partials again, where I say, okay, if we have auxiliary domains, then display this headline and then render the website domains list, and I pass in the auxiliary domains, the aliases in particular. And if we have auxiliary domains that are redirects, we do the same, and I can reuse this partial simply by passing a different attribute, in this case the redirect domains. And the partial itself, website domains list, isn't too complex either. It still has a bit of logic in it, especially feature flags. But then again, I simply pass in a domain list, and I can say domain list each, whatever that list is. I simply assume it's full of domains. And since the only thing I do is a link to the domain name and link to 2 icons, or show 2 links in the form of icons, that's also pretty clear. And I could even move these link to calls into the presenter object as well. That would make things even more readable, because this line especially is very long and a bit hard to read, because it's a long list of arguments. So I would probably be able to refactor this by moving these two link methods into the presenter object as well, giving them more specific names. So that would be the website, the domain edit link, and that would be the domain remove link or something. And that's all I would need to know in this template. There's a link and another link. And were I interested in what these links exactly do, I could go into the presenter object and take a look. So Diego wrote, that was my doubt, because when I read I was confused between use presenter or view objects, but now you understand it. View object is a presenter in the Rails context. Exactly, and presenters themselves are just a special case of delegators or decorators, which probably would be better named with the older name that's in the Gang of Four book, that's simply a wrapper object, because these presenters all wrap existing objects. Alrighty. Wow, that was a long explanation. Let's see. Oh, there's still tea. I sure hope that helped. And I'll be more than happy to answer other questions. So if you like, join my Discord server and send me your questions there. You can send them personally to me, or you can also simply post them to the Ruby channel, and I'll be more than happy to pick your questions up. LPC, welcome back. Not to distract from the topic, but a little obsessed with that keyboard. Is it small, or do you have the hands of a giant? I do not have the hands of a giant. I more or less have the hands of a normal person, I think. Let's go back to the coding screen, where you have the camera. Oh, I think the camera is a bit overblown here. Didn't I set the lighting correctly? Here we go, that's better. So the keyboard is not very large. It's what's called a 75% keyboard, because it has about 75% of the keys of a full-size keyboard with a numpad and everything. So it basically has the alpha keys, it has the arrow keys, it has a row of function keys, and a few of the navigation keys as well. So it has the same number of keys, I think, as what's called a 10 keyless. So a keyboard that has only the numpad removed, but in a more compact format. So I can actually show you what a 10 keyless would look like. Wait. So that's a 10 keyless keyboard, where the function keys are more offset from the alpha block, and where the arrow keys and the nav cluster are offset as well. And so what's the only thing that's missing here is the numpad. What this 75% keyboard does is simply move everything together and still retain the navigation cluster, but it's not a real cluster anymore. They've just moved in here. Yeah, I do have a keyboard collection. My wife would say I have a keyboard obsession, but let's not go into that. Yeah, it's a very nice form factor. I think I like the 75% form factor the most. because it still gives me all the keys I need, even some that I really don't need that much, which mostly are the function keys. And while it's also possible to use function keys with additional layers and arrow keys, so you can get rid of these and move to a more compact layout, which is the 60% keyboard layout. It's nice to have dedicated arrow keys as well. So let me show you 60% in comparison. So this is a 60% keyboard. It gets rid of the arrow keys, the whole navigation cluster, and the function keys. And of course it still makes them available by using this function key over here. So if I hold the function key and press 1, it's F1, for example. And you can also see the arrow keys here, I hope. So function plus semicolon is cursor left, so function plus slash is cursor down, and things like that. And there are even keyboards that are more compact than this. For example, there are 40% keyboards that even get rid of the number keys. But I can't imagine using a 40% keyboard for coding. If you are mostly a writer who writes prose, I could imagine having to press function Q to get a 1, but for coding I don't think they are in any way suitable. So that's that. Don't get me into talking about keyboards, because that will take another hour. Page up and down are also on the function layer. So in this case they are next to the cursor block. L and period are page up, page down if pushed together with the function key. And a feature that I really like is this keyboard has what's called split backspace, because the backspace key that is normally over here has been split into two keys, namely the backslash key and the tilde key, and the backspace key itself moved down here, where normally we have a huge backspace key, which is completely unnecessary, because while we code with backspace and the pipe symbol, we don't use it that much, at least not as much as the backspace key. And by putting it down here, it's nearer to the home row where my fingers normally rest. I can easily reach that with my pinky, and I don't have to reach up here. So most of the keyboards I'm using more regularly, and all the keyboards I'm going to build in the future will have that split backspace, because I really prefer that. And since it gets confusing with different keyboard layouts, I've actually remapped this 75% keyboard to have backspace on the backslash key, so I can actually press the backslash key and use it as the backspace key, and backspace, vice versa, is mapped to backslash and the pipe symbol. Otherwise I'd get confused and make a lot of mistakes. And especially I think with small hands, this layout that has the backspace key just above the enter key makes a lot of sense. And another thing, and that's also taken from the original layout of the Happy Hacking keyboard, is that useless key over here. nobody, I think, uses caps lock. And that is why the Happy Hacking keyboard and my keyboards, either by hardware or by software, have the control key on the caps lock key. So if I type something and I'd like to press Ctrl W to delete it, I can simply step to the left with my pinky finger and press W with my ring finger, and that's it. I don't have to reach for the control key, and I don't accidentally press the caps lock key, resulting in a lot of garbage. Tax accountants use it? Oh, the caps lock key. Yeah, tax accountants and internet trolls, I think. So that's why there is still a way to trigger caps lock, but you'll have to press function and tab, for example, or something like that. And since you're not using it that much, that's, I think, a fair compromise. Alrighty. The Happy Hacking keyboard is a Japanese invention. It's been around for more than 10 years now, and it has its own keyboard layout. Its inventor said, okay, let's get rid of everything we don't need and make sure that we can reach everything that is important, especially if we are working with Unix machines. Everything we need can be easily reached from the home row. So if you place your fingers, as all the touch typists do, we should be able to reach everything easily, which is not the case with traditional function keys. It's not with the traditional backspace key. Control is harder to reach than caps lock, which is complete idiocy if you're using a Linux or Unix machine. And especially if we are using tools like Vim, we don't even use the arrow keys because Vim uses H, J, K, and L for moving the cursor. So that's why the Happy Hacking keyboard has a very optimized layout. So that's the Happy Hacking keyboard here. It's very minimal. It has control here, it has backspace here, it has backslash and the tilde key here, which still leaves place for the escape key here. That's the only key that's left from the function key row in the normal ANSI layout. And we don't have control keys here because it's already up here. That leaves us with our GUI and Alt keys next to the spacebar. And that's that. And if we want to use function keys, we can use the Fn key +1, that's F1, 2, 3, 4. If I want to move the cursor. Oh, I should also. Oh, of course, it's not connected yet. I would have to connect this. There we go. Function C. Oh. Is it function Q? Normally I'm using it with Bluetooth with my iPad. But I'm not sure. Oh, Q and then 0, right? Yeah. Well, anyway, I just wanted to demonstrate the layout. Okay, lots of keyboards on my desk suddenly. no problem. No problem. No distraction at all. If you're talking to someone collecting keyboards and asking them to show off their collection, they will be more than happy to do that. Okay, so dashboard. That's already the right topic. So let's see if there is something we can do in Ruby on Rails on our dashboard. Let's go to GitLab. Dashboard project. Issues. Live coding. So, what do we have here? I would say let's focus on the bugs first. And I guess that's one of the more outward-facing bugs. What is my setup for working? So the machine I'm streaming from is also the machine that I use for work normally. It's a more or less brand new iMac, 27-inch. It has the i9 CPU. I think it's the 8-core. Let's find out. Yes, it has 16 logical cores, 32 gigs of RAM. And I think only half a gig SSD, because I don't do storage intensive stuff anyway. The MacBook Air is a great machine. I had the 11-inch MacBook Air, I think probably the same as you have, the 2011, and I loved it because it is so portable and still has enough power to do regular stuff. So the main reason why I got this more or less top-of-the-line machine is for streaming, because before I had the 2015 era iMac and it simply couldn't cope with the video encoding during streaming, and that's why I... Me too. Welcome to the stream. Saying Glenn PM install would probably consume that. Yeah, you might be right. You might be right. So I'm happy I don't do Node projects. Even though I will have to deal with NPM sooner than later, because I'd like to get a bit more JavaScript into my applications, and so there might be a few modules that need to be installed. I don't have any modules yet, I think. Is there a... No, there's no packages file. But I think in my new Rails project there already is one. Let's see, the Mops app. Yeah, there's the Node modules directory. Yeah, and even if I got the need to have something more spacious, I could always attach something. USB 3 is surprisingly powerful. I bought my previous iMac with the what Apple calls the Fusion drive, which is basically a spinning Rust hard disk with an SSD-based cache in front. And that didn't hold up well. I ran into all kinds of problems with playing World of Warcraft, for example. Sometimes scenes took ages to render, which isn't good if you are in a raid. So I eventually replaced the internal boot disk with an external Samsung T5 disk hooked up to the iMac using USB 3, and everything worked brilliantly. So I would do the same if all of a sudden my storage requirements would grow. At the moment I'm 70% at the 70% mark of my SSD, and it doesn't grow much more than that. Also because I, for example, offload old stream recordings and things like that to an extra server that runs 2 4 terabyte hard disks, USB disks in a RAID 1 setting, so that's more than enough for archival storage. And yes, I also part-time offloaded my development to a development server. Visual Studio Code has brilliant support for working over SSH, so you can use VS Code on your local machine, but VS Code pulls everything over SSH and works that way. So that was also great because it's very easy to get a high power development server in the cloud. Now that I have this high-powered machine, I returns to working locally. Visual Story Code, yeah, that's something we should think about, because that would be something for screenwriters. Okay, let's get something done. I guess I'll stick with working in the terminal here instead of going to Visual Story Code. The only reason to switch to VS Code at the moment would be that I have the new Dracula Pro theme in there, which is the premium version of the Dracula theme, which I like even more than the well-known Dracula theme I'm using here. I tried out RubyMine, which is the JetBrains IDE for Ruby, but it didn't stick. I returned to either using Vim, as I'm going to do now, or VS Code. So, here we are in the master branch. So I guess first of all we should cut a new branch for this issue, 561. 561 email case. So the background of this issue is simply if someone wants to add a collaborator to a certain specific website, they can simply enter this collaborator's email address. They have to be registered first, but then they'll simply enter the email address and this person gets added to the website project. However, this email input and search is case sensitive. So if someone mistypes the email address, which in email context isn't a problem, they'll get an error message that the person can't be found. So somehow we have to make sure that this works case insensitively, and let's find out how we do this. So here we have Vim open already. Lately I've been using NeoVim, and I'm pretty happy with it. It was quite easy to switch from original Vim to NeoVim. And I guess we're talking about the website user roles controller, where the new action simply renders the email address form and then adds the user. we pass in the email parameter to this method add website user from form, which is a private message down here. And here we do a user find by email. And somehow we need to make sure that this becomes case insensitive. So a common approach, of course, would be to make sure all emails get stored in, say, lowercase. And then we can lowercase the form input as well before we pass it to find by, and that should make things easy for us. That would be one way to do it. And I wonder if there is another way. Because the only downside to this strategy would be we would have to migrate existing data. So just in case people already have used uppercase in their email addresses, they are now stored in the database that way. And by forcing lowercase in my logic here, I would make these entries unfindable. And I generally try to avoid having to transform existing data, even though it's not too hard, but munging production data is always makes me feel a bit queasy. So let's try and find out if there is another way. And then we can still compare our alternatives. Rails, search, case insensitive. Active record, case insensitive search in Rails model. That sounds like what we're looking for. Oh, of course, there is a lower function in SQL that can do this. Okay, that would be an alternative. However, there's an obvious downside to this, which is we probably would have to have a lowercase index as well. Else we would do full table scans in our search, which is never optimal. And the same goes for I-like. Thanks for the suggestion. So that would be another alternative, doing an I-like and then simply not use any wildcards. That's also an interesting side information, making the uniqueness validation case insensitive as well would make sense in this case. And then, yeah, we'll need to have this unique index on the lowercase email address. Interesting. There's even a Postgres data type CI text, but text also means huge strings, and that's not exactly... Oh, well, this sounds like overkill. Using a CI text type Would also mean we'll have to alter the whole table, and I don't like that either. Case-insensitive would also add slight performance hit. Not if you create the database index. If you create a unique index on the lower name, or lower email in my case, that should have no performance impact. Because as soon as you get a select where lower email equals something, Postgres will use this index. Huh. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll happily make this more readable for you. I actually stream only on 720p, so I should make sure people can read this. So here we are. So we would not use find by, instead we'd use where lower email equals something. And by using this index, that adds another index on email where everything is lowercased, we would prevent the performance impact. So, which approach do I like the most? In this case, I can retain my data. I just have to create a new index. So just in theory, would this impact production operation if our database was actually huge? I don't think so, because Postgres would be able to create this index asynchronously, I think. There shouldn't be any locks or something. And all we'd have to do in the code would be searching using the lower function in SQL, which is a bit more complex than simply saying find by email. But it's not as easy to read. And I agree with me too. Migrating the database to make sure everything is lowercased, that's already in there, and then simply lowercasing everything before writing it to the database for the future would also be a good approach and cleaner. The downside is everywhere where we make updates to our email column, we would have to make sure that it's lowercased. Which could complicate the code. I don't think it will complicate my actual code, because I think there's only a single place where we even write this. Or maybe two, but it's all in the user controller. But I don't like constraints like this. Everywhere you do this, from now on, you have to make sure that. Because it's so easy to miss one of these locations, and then you'll get the strangest of effects. It's really hard. I try not to overthink this, but I would say having this in place is necessary in any case, because if I want to guarantee uniqueness of email addresses, I must make this case insensitive. Otherwise, people would enter unique variations of the same email address. Ruby does have hooks that you could use to make this automatic. You could say, okay, there's a before save hook that modifies your data before it gets saved to the database. That would be a good approach, just to make sure that any object that gets written to the database gets its email address lowercased. The downside to that approach is that these hooks are not obvious. There is a hook somewhere in your model definition, but if you are not aware that it is there, you might wonder why all the email addresses end up lowercased, and even though between entering and submitting the form and saving the object, there is no obvious transformation because it's implicit. And in general, I don't like implicit. I prefer explicitness over implicit magical stuff. This looked like a trivial issue, which it is not, at least not in my head. So, well, we can start with the validation. Validates email, presents true, uniqueness, case sensitive, false. That definitely needs to go into the user model. We do not even validate the email address here, I think. No, we don't. Interesting. Okay. So validates email, presence true, uniqueness, sensitive false. And let's have this in here. Okay. Now, do we want to have lowercase guaranteed in the database, or do we transform stuff as we need it? think I would prefer making sure everything is lowercased. That way, whenever we access the database, we already get email addresses in the format we want them in. And we don't have to transform everything all the time. So how is email defined anyway? Email is default empty, not null. That's also bullshit, isn't it? Email is such an important field in our user accounts. And if it can't be null, it shouldn't be empty as well. So that's something I'd like to change anyway. There simply can't be any user without an email address, because email is used for logging in. So that needs to be fixed in any case. Thanks for following me too. I appreciate having you on the stream. Okay. So I guess the graph behind my head is our production monitoring system. It's the number of queries processed by one of our databases. And at the moment it is processing about between 3,000 and 4,000 queries per second. Many queries. Since we are a specialized hosting business and we mostly run websites based on Drupal and WordPress, there are many queries to our databases. Some websites actually execute more than 100 queries to render a single page, which is insane, and we fight the good fight to get the number down, but yeah, that's how you end up with thousands of queries per second. But our databases are custom built to run a lot of queries, so we do have databases that easily process 10,000 queries per second or more. Yeah, WordPress is terrible in terms of, or can be terrible in terms of database access. One of our customers is a web agency specializing in WordPress, and they do a lot of work getting the number of queries down. But if you use the standard code that comes with WordPress and you don't use custom, in terms of WordPress, it's called plugins. Drupal calls them modules. So if you don't write custom plugins that use optimized queries, you can end up with a lot of database traffic. Yeah, the thing is that most developers don't take into account that this website might get thousands of users per hour, or might have maybe an editorial team working on the website all the time. And editorial team means that everyone is logged in, everyone gets custom pages, and that puts a lot of strain on the database. And as a developer, if you only test it with a few test queries on your laptop, everything looks great, but as soon as you have suddenly hundreds of people working on the same website at the same time, things might look differently. And that's our daily business. And that's also my excuse why I'm often struggling with pretty trivial stuff in Rails, because I'm more of a site reliability engineer than a web developer. But I try to learn. So what we are going to do is to run Rails generate migration, make email case insensitive. So we would have to use something like this. Index user on email lowercase on users using b3 lower email. Wait, now I'm going the other way. After all, it's getting late. My brain starts being fried. Nope, 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 nope. I actually don't know how to delete stuff in Nerd3. I've just installed the plugin recently. So let's simply go to a shell and remove this again. So we still have the change in the user model, where we validate uniqueness for case sensitivity. I wanted to remove the default. That we can migrate. So Rails generate migration, remove default from user email. Change column users email string null false, but no default. Isn't that right? Let's find out. How do my other change column calls look like? I'm not doing this often enough to Okay, we should put null false into in a hash, but other than that, it's okay. And apparently I don't even have to have this in an... But still, let's put it into a hash. So that's one part, just removing the default. Well, there is always one thing I do when I can't really decide what I need to do, and that is give it more time. And since I'm running out of my stream time, it's almost 6 o'clock here and I'd like to get ready for dinner, I'll postpone the decisions for later and let it sink in a bit. Okay, so as usual, let's write some things down. Did we learn anything? Well, we discussed wrapper, classes, decorator, objects, presenter, objects, and view objects at length. And that was really fun. Thanks for the question, Diego. I'll be happy to answer more questions. Join my Discord servers, send me questions, challenge me, and I'll be happy to come up with something for my stream. So thanks to what's your stream name? Diga OB2 for a great question. Is water wet? I'll have to ponder that as well, and I'll be back with an answer in one of my next streams. Alright, let's find out if there is someone we can raid. Let's take a look at my fellow live coders. Brian Clark is online. I think we're going to raid Clark. Ayo. Alright, so don't go away when I put the ending screen on. We are still going to raid what program is that? I've simply opened another browser to show me the Twitch live coders team and who is online at the moment. Okay, yeah, don't go away. I'll switch on the going offline screen. Oh, that's Notion. Notion.so. It's more or less a... if a wiki and a web database application got a baby, that's basically what Notion is. I've started using it as a wiki because it really makes documentation, yes, Notion.so, it makes it very easy, and recently I've also discovered that their database functionality, which is interconnected tables more or less, is really nice as well. It lets you, for example, manage your streams and stream notes in the form of a table with additional metadata and things like that. And each database record in turn is another page with attributes, and that's really nice. So we've done that, and it allows you to do to-do lists and stuff, and yeah, it's really great. You'll need a bit of time to try it out because it has a lot of features, but I find it really nice. The only downside is they still don't offer an API, so you can't automate stuff, and I'm desperately waiting for that. I hope they'll get that finished soon, but that's the only downside I can see at the moment. So, yep, that's it for today. I'll be back tomorrow for Retro Saturday. I'll have to think of something. Yes, exactly. Guys, please. Retro Saturday means that I'll pick something historic. Maybe we'll install an older operating system on some older emulated hardware or something. I'm not sure yet, but I'll be back tomorrow at 4 p.m. And now we're going to raid Clark.io. So say hello for me over there, and until next time, thanks for watching and have a great weekend.